Dear students, welcome to E-Pathshala. I am Dr. Rakesh Thakur. I teach sociology as an associate professor in Postgraduate Government College Sector 11, Chandigarh. Today's module is about conceptualizing development, ideas and ideologies of development. In this module, in the beginning, I would be introducing the theme. Then I would try and locate the idea of development within a larger framework. We would also be talking about the meaning of development. We would like to historically locate this concept. We would also understand that how development is not a singular concept, but its meaning has been contested over a period of time. And we would see that how in contemporary era we have conceptualized development vis-a-vis globalization. We would not only understand development, but we would also try and see what are the voices of dissent. And the three voices of dissent that we're going to talk about is liberal critique to development, Marxist critique to development, and finally the postmodern critique to development. So let's begin and understand development as a process. Let's understand what do we mean by development. Developmental history suggests that one could criticize a given approach and propose modification or alteration or improvement to it, but the fact of development itself and the need for it could not be doubted. Development has achieved the status of certainty in the social imaginary. Even the opponents of capitalist strategies just provided alternative ways of development. Thus, development is core, is central to understanding whatever is happening around us. Development primarily, in a sense, tries to tell us that one is moving ahead. Now, let's understand that why this whole discussion or curiosity about development came about. It came about primarily because in the post-World War II phenomena, the world discovered mass poverty. It was recognized that 2/3 of the world population were living under conditions of acute poverty. Famine was widespread, hunger, lack of nutrition, poverty, squalor, misery. The life of the people were marked by all these phenomena. The suffering was widespread. This led to a curiosity: what can one do to remove such chronic conditions of poverty and social unrest which afflicted the poor? This was happening more so in the third world countries, and at an international perspective, it proved a threat to the world peace. Social scientists and many world leaders believed that genuine world prosperity and peace are indivisible. It cannot last in one part if the other parts live under conditions of poverty and ill health. They feared discontent spreading across the globe if prosperity and wealth was cornered only in few pockets. They realized that the destinies of rich and poor countries were closely linked. Now, let's understand the way poverty is being understood. So there is one colonial way of understanding poverty and the other is the post-colonial way. Colonial concerns believed that even if natives could be somewhat enlightened by the presence of colonizers, nothing could be done about their poverty because development happened to be a white man's burden. The colonizers believed as natives did not possess any capacity for science and technology, how could they reap the benefits of development? Massive poverty appeared with the spread of market economy. Domestic mode of production was no longer the rule. It was the monetized economy which came to the forefront. The erstwhile community ties which played a central role in economic exchange to an exchange had completely broken down. Many people were deprived from access to land, water and natural resources. For example, tribal who understood the forest to be their natural resources has lost it to landlords and money lenders during the colonial regimes because the land was not in their name. They did not understand rule or law. They just believe in their folk tales in which this land was a land of their ancestor. But with the coming up of the colonized world, with the Industrial Revolution, more land was required for the process of production, and thus the land was colonized. What was rightfully theirs was now legally belonging to someone else. Discontent was bound to happen. The post-World War II witnessed two important breaks in the conception and management of poverty. There was a whole system which came up which dealt with poverty based on assistance, and it was at two levels. At one, there was a transformation of poor into assisted, and secondly, social scientists realized that the treatment of poverty required new ways of intervention, and thus new domains need to be conquered if poverty programs were to be implemented in letter and spirit. Industrial and technological knowledge and interventions in education, health, hygiene, morality, employment. To sum it up, welfare state came at the core. Globalization of poverty entailed, and people realized that the 2/3 of the world is poor. The poor were defined as lacking in what the rich had in terms of money. Economic conception of poverty was in terms of per capita income. And in 1948, World Bank defined the poor as those countries with an annual per capita income below $100. After understanding poverty, let's understand the origin of the concept of the word underdevelopment. The origin of the word underdevelopment can be traced to the American President Harry Truman's January 20th, 1949 speech, and I quote, "More than half the people of the world are living in conditions approaching misery. Their food is inadequate. They are victims of disease. Their economic life is primitive and stagnant. Their poverty is handicap and a threat both to them and to more prosperous areas. I believe that we should make available to peace-loving people the benefits of our store of technical knowledge in order to help them realize their aspirations for a better life. What we envisage is a program of development based on the concept of democratic fair dealing. Greater production is the key to prosperity, and the key to greater production is a wider, more vigorous application of modern scientific and technical knowledge." Quote close. Three factors that gave a shape to the program of development worldwide was: number one, emergence of US as the undisputable leader of world affairs with its economic opulence and military preeminence, rising socialist regimes in Eastern Europe and successful march of communists to power in China and Soviet Russia, decolonization of erstwhile colonial nations of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It is in this geopolitical representation of the world that development emerged as a grand strategy for advancement of West-East rivalry and lent legitimacy to the enterprise of modernization and development. Besides geopolitics, two other factors that shaped the strategy of development. Advancement in science and technology was one of them. The increased experience with public intervention with economy was another. The early years of development emphasized to a great extent on the need for some sort of planning with an active state intervention in economy. Let's now do a historical investigation of the concept of development. The common understanding: it is a process through which the potentiality of an object are realized until it reaches its natural, complete, full-fledged form. This term was first used in biology to explain natural growth of plants and animals. And the person to use this was Darwin, who said that transformation that moved towards a more perfect form. Many would say that evolution and development were used interchangeably. But for us social scientists, the word entered the social sphere in the last part of 18th century. In 1786, it was Justus Moser who used the word in 1786 to mean gradual process of social change. Later, development became the central category in Karl Marx's work. During 1930s, the association between colonialism and development took a new turn. In 1939, British government transformed its law of development of colonies to law of development and welfare of colonies. This law argued for the need to guarantee the natives minimum level of nutrition, health and education. The conqueror should be capable of economically developing the conquered region. It should accept the responsibility of caring for the well-being of the natives. By the mid-20th century, development implied a favorable change, a step from simple to complex, inferior to superior, worse to better. Now, over a period of time, there has been a contested meaning of development. Its first promoters reduced it to economic growth, that is, growth in the income per person in economically underdeveloped areas, or the capacity of a static or retarded economy to generate and sustain an annual growth rate in the GNP. Arthur Lewis talked in terms of growth per capita output. Keynesian model focused on aggregate income and employment. Rosen, for him, it was capital investment, building infrastructure, promoting industrialization, positive state intervention. And for Paul Barra, it is increase in per capita production of material goods. For Rostow, in his non-communist manifesto in 1960s, it was the 3 stages of economic growth. For Rostow, it was in these different stages of economic growth that he saw development. Traditional and stagnant, low per capita stage, the first one. Transitional stage, which had preconditions for development, are late. The third was the takeoff stage, that is the beginning of the economic growth. And finally, the fourth, the industrialized, where there would be a mass production, mass consumption stage. For Rostow, he assumed that this single variable can characterize a whole society. After doing these thinkers, it's important to understand how the United Nations took the process of development. United Nations declared its proposal for action of the first United Nations development decade. The problem of the underdeveloped country is not just growth but development. Development is growth plus change. Change in turn is social and cultural as well as economic and qualitative as well as quantitative. The key concept must be improved quality of people's life. The push for social development. In 1963, UN Research Institute for Social Development, UNRISD, was created. In 1966, ECOSOC resolution recognized the interdependence of economic and social factors and the need for harmonizing economic and social planning. Social development was considered as a precondition for economic development. Despite this gradual change in meaning, the first development decade continued to emphasize economic growth. The optimism of growth started to dampen by the end of the decade. Development either leaves behind or even creates large area of poverty, stagnation, marginality, and actual exclusion from social and economic progress. The second development decade, from 1970 to 80s, while the first decade considered social and economic aspect, the second involved a merger. For the first decade, the economic and social aspect were treated separately. In the second, they wanted to merge it. The International Development Strategy of the United Nations in 1970 called for a global strategy based on joint and concentrated action in all spheres of social and economic life, to leave no sector of the population outside the scope of development, to effect structural changes which favors national development, and to activate all sectors of development to participate in development process, to aim at social equality, that is, equitable distribution of income, to give high priority to development of human potentials, provision of employment opportunity, and meeting needs. Over a period of time, there was a quest for unified approach, and the Cocoyoc Declaration in 1974 said that the purpose of development should not be to develop things but to develop man. Here the human being now became central concern. Any attempt that does not lead to fulfillment of basic need is a travesty to the idea of development. The Declaration of 1974 emphasized diversity, many roads to development, goals of self-reliance, and fundamental economic, social, and political change. These ideas reflected in Hammarskjöld Foundation, which suggested in 1975 another development which needed to be human-centered development. In 1975, UNESCO insisted on integrated development, a total multi-relational process that indicates all aspects of life of a collectivity, of its relations with the outside world, and of its own consciousness. In 1975, United Nations asked for a more effective approach than that of international development strategy to achieve social objective. In 1976, ILO offered the answer through the basic needs approach. Let's understand the basic needs approach. Achievement of certain specific minimum standard of living before end of century. Explicit recognition that development would not eliminate hunger and misery itself. It proposed directly dealing with the task of coping with those needs instead of expecting their satisfaction as a result of development. Much attractive to World Bank, as it could set the target groups for the development program. It was to be promoted by national government, possessed virtues of universal applicability, and while at the same time being country specific. The third development decade starts from 1980s. This was also considered to be the lost decade of development. There was a rise of Asian tiger. There was an age of debt crisis and structural adjustment program, which saw provision of deregulation, privatization of government enterprise, export promotion, removing of subsidies. Let's talk now of age of post-development, that is, a new development ethos came in the 1990s. The new development ethos in 1990s primarily talked about sustainable development, having economic efficiency, social equity, and environmental sustainability. Human development focused on basic needs such as healthcare and education. The post-development thinking questioned the inevitability of development. The development in the new millennium talked about MDG, that is Millennium Development Goals of 2000. It reiterated the notions of human development, sustainability, and international cooperation. Finally, we come to the global goals of 2015, which talked about ending poverty, fighting inequality and injustice, and fix climate change. Thus, there are primarily three perspectives on development: a long-term process of a structural transformation, a dominant discourse on Western modernity, a short-term to medium-term outcomes of desirable target. Let's understand development as structural transformation. The key characteristics in these understanding are to be focused are, that is, the process of structural and societal change is the central focus, and it is historical and has a long-term outlook. Major societal shift on one dimension would also have radical implication in the other. Development involves changes to socio-economic structure. Process is not related to any specific set of objectives. And now let's talk about development as short to medium term outcome. The key features are, it focuses on outcome of change, relatively short-term outlooks and goals, presupposes a set of goals. But these are problematic because of the predetermined goal may not be shared by those whose development we are talking about. Paternalistic assumption regarding what is good for people, whose objective and values become universal. These are debatable. Thus, development is a dominant discourse of Western modernity. In these, a radical view on development developed, which constituted bad change and bad outcomes through imposition of Western ethnocentric notion of development on and modernity. Notions of underdevelopment, poverty are socially constructed from the vantage point of powerful, involves hegemonic domination of powerful over powerless. Thus, power relations are inherent in development discourse. The voice of dissent came from three aspects: liberal critique, the Marxist critique, and the postmodern critique. Mahbubul Haq, the poverty curtain. In this, he talked about growth in GNP does not filter down what is needed, a direct attack on poverty. The market mechanism is distorted by existing distribution of income. Institutional reforms are generally more decisive than appropriate price signals for fashioning relevant development strategies. New development strategy must be based on satisfaction of basic human need rather than on market demand. Development style should be such as to build a development around people. Distribution and employment must be an integral part of any production plan. Increase the productivity of poor by a radical change in the direction of investment towards the poorest section of society, a drastic restructuring of political and economic power. The Marxist critique of development talks of underdevelopment is a created condition. The underdevelopment is a result of a particular form of capitalist development, from interdependence to dependent and uneven development. Development does not necessarily travel from center to periphery. Underdevelopment of periphery is the direct result of development in the center. Underdevelopment is likely to be a permanent phenomenon. The postmodern critique offers a radical and pessimist perspective to development and argues for an end of an development era. Primarily, postmodernism can be understood as a critique of the modern age based on scientific principles of positivism, objectivity, and the tendency to know the truth. In conclusion, development has assumed a more reflexive character where the task of development practitioner not only includes dealing with problems of non-development or underdevelopment, but also equally and in a significant manner involves managing the risk and uncertainties arising out of the project of development. Today, in the lesson, we started off with understanding the historical background of the idea of development. During the course, we realized that there was never a consent about the term development. Different thinkers gave it different meaning. Different parts of the world took it in a different manner. Thus, sociologically speaking, development, the concept of development will keep on changing. Even after you have seen this module, a week after, a month later, you would see development in its new avatar. Not only development can be taken as a good pill, but we realize that there are people who are dissenting to the very idea of development. We discussed the liberal critique, the Marxist critique, and the postmodern critique. That means there is so much more to be said about development and its discontent, as well as about the development discourse itself. Thank you.